This movie is more on named ranges. We're going to name a constant and we're going to name a formula. And we're going to change the default formula reference, which is absolute, to be a relative reference. And then we're going to change the reference for the worksheet to be a generic worksheet reference. So naming a formula and a constant. We're going to begin by talking about naming a constant. A common reason to do this is a unit of measure conversion, because that is never going to change. And since it takes several steps to change a named range, you're less likely to inadvertently change it. So how do we name a constant? I'm going to left-click the Formulas tab and go to the Name Manager and left-click New. And input a name. Leave the scope at the workbook setting. And instead of having a cell reference, I want to actually put the number in there, 63,360. Left-click OK, and close that. And now I can use that as a reference in a cell formula, equal cell D20, which is 10 times. I can start to type this, and I'll get the IntelliSense to show me the range that I just created. Tab to enter it into the cell, and enter, and I've got my conversion. And I can go up here and change this. I can delete it, and it's not going to affect the constant that I just set up that represents that conversion factor. I pulled up the Name Manager dialog box to show you that the refers to field begins with an equal sign. This is our constant. It equals 63,360. But since a named range really isn't anything other than a formula, you can name a formula. I'm going to close this. So we're going to create a named range that's actually a named formula, and then use it to convert the miles that are listed in column H to feet. Our conversion factor is 5,280 because there's 5,280 feet per mile. So creating a named formula, we can left-click the Define Name and get the New Name dialog box. And I want to name my formula. The refers to box is referring to the cell that was active when I launched the Define Name or New Name dialog box. Well, I want to change that to be that, and I want to multiply it by 5,280. Left-click OK. Make I-20 the active cell. And now I don't have to reference cell H10. Begin to type enough to where I get the convert miles to feet range. Tab to enter it into the cell, and then press the Enter key. So I've got my miles converted to feet. The problem, though, is if I copy this, Control-C, arrow down, Enter, obviously 14 miles doesn't convert to the same number of feet as 10 miles. So what's happened? Well, when we set up the range, we've got a reference that's an absolute reference. So I'm going to delete the content that's in cells I-20 and I-21. And I'm going to select cell I-20, left-click the Name Manager, because we want to change this formula from an absolute reference, pressing F4 3 times, 1, 2, 3, to a relative reference. Close. Yes, I want to save the changes that I made to the named reference. And now when I use this named formula, convert miles to feet, down arrow to get me to the miles to feet named range, tabbing, entering, Control-C to copy, and entering again, I get my formula to work correctly. And this named formula references the cell to the left and converts that number to feet, assuming that number is miles, or more simply, it takes the number and multiplies it by 5,280. Control-C, enter again. But there's a problem. If I were to copy this formula to a different worksheet, I'm in I-22, Control-C, I'm going to go to Sheet 1 and copy this formula to I-22, enter. I still get the same result, 95,040. And there's nothing in the cell to the left of this named range. In fact, I can enter something and it's not going to change what's in cell I-22. That's because the named range references this worksheet. So how do we fix that? I'm going to delete the contents again, left-click cell I-20, go to the name manager, and change this formula manually to be exclamation point H20 times 5,280, close. And now when I use that named range or named formula, I get the correct answer, and I can copy that to sheet 1. And when I change what's in the cell to the left, my named formula updates accordingly. So that's named constants and named formulas. We first set up a named constant, which is very good for unit of measure conversions because they don't change. And since it takes several steps to change a named range, you're less likely to inadvertently change it. We also set up a named formula, and when you do that, the default applied by Excel is to use an absolute reference. We can change the absolute reference by pressing F4 3 times and change it to a relative reference, which fixes our problem that we might have on a worksheet. But if we want to use that named formula in another place in the workbook outside of the worksheet that we created it in, we need to use a generic worksheet reference instead of a specific worksheet reference.